Hey, what's happening, you guys? And welcome back to the Proclivity Podcast. I'm your host, Joel Cochran. I'm here with Emily Rodella, and we have an incredible special guest today that's joining us, Dr. Nathan Riley. And we're going to get into today talking about everything that comes with birth. We're going to hit so many different angles. Who knows the directions we're going to go? Emily's going to do a lot more talking than me. It's going to be the Emily and Nathan show today. One, because they have the most experience. And two, Emily's a woman. So she got that one up on me today. So if you are joining us today, we're going to be diving into everything that has to do with birth. Nathan is an incredible man, incredible doctor. I'm very, very excited. So without further ado, we're going to welcome Dr. Nathan Riley onto the show. He's a board certified OB-GYN. He left the medical industry complex due to his disillusionment with the standard of care within the conventional maternity care model. So we're going to dive into that piece in part. I just want to highlight that. Dr. Riley now focuses his time on upholding the traditional practice of midwifery. I said that wrong the first time. It's not midwifery, it's midwifery. He supports midwives as a collaborative physician for midwives of all varieties in over 20 states. He's an advocate for home birth and still attends births for those in need. I want to welcome to the show, very excited today, Dr. Nathan Riley.
It is my pleasure to be here. The golden voice of radio. I need to hire you to do my intros from now on, all of my ad reads and all of that. Joel. I feel like I'm floating in chocolate milk right now.
Oh my goodness. Now
float down the river of chocolate milk.
Just soaking in as the clouds of marshmallows are above you.
There's like a left-turn rainbow above us, and little marshmallows are falling, little colorful marshmallows, making milk extra sweet.
Oh my gosh. You know what? I mean, it's like we're going on a trip already. And that's something that we talked about actually before the show started. So we're going to take an angle here. For those who are listening right now, they're going to be like, oh, okay, cool. Let's talk about birth. Okay, well, we're going to talk about drugs. Just straight out the gate. That way it catches your attention and you're going to stick with us. Don't worry, we're going to get into births and all that kind of stuff. Yet you caught my attention earlier when you were talking about psychedelics with birth. I know nothing about this. Emily might be more on it. You know, I don't know how many drugs that Emily took when she was pregnant or giving birth. Other than the drugs they may have given you in the hospital. Did they give you any drugs, Emily, or did you just soldier on?
No, I was.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I got some
well,
drugs.
We're talking about a little bit different drugs here. We're talking a little bit of psychedelics. Nathan, fill us in on this realm because I've never heard of it.
Yeah. Well, if you're listening and you've experienced a psychedelic journey, not at like Red Rocks or at Burning Man, which are great places to experiment with drugs, but if you've done it in a really, really intentional way, you start to see beyond the veil, and the application of psychedelic let's call them medicines, because we can't just say plant medicines, because that doesn't really include the kingdom fungi, which, comprises, of course, a variety of mushrooms, including the psilocybes varieties, which are the ones that people like to use in order to experience God, in order to get in touch with something beyond just the mere physical. And there's a lot of controversy around these things. Of course, they're illegal, or they've been decriminalized in some places. Colorado, I think, being one, Oakland, California being another, where you're able to have them and trade them, but you're not supposed to be selling them. Of course, this is since the 60s when there was this sort of stigmatization. But psilocybin, for example, is one of the active components of what we call magic mushrooms, shrooms. And It's a Schedule 1 substance, meaning it's in the same category as heroin as far as the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, is concerned. And that should really put people's like flags up. Like, why is this considered just as bad as heroin? Heroin's highly addictive. It kills people. Nobody's really dying on psilocybin. I mean, you could take a big dose and walk in front of a car, but that stuff doesn't generally happen. So that's the first kind of question that I always had. And when I was in medical school, I was pretty straight edge. I didn't even smoke any pot maybe until med school. And, and that was part of the deal is you're in school for like forever, and you have to get the highest test grades if you want to get into school, med school, and then highest test grades to get into residency. And it just goes on from there. So you rise to the cream rises to the top, so to speak. And if you're doing drugs the whole time, that's not going to be very, I don't know, it's not a very sophisticated way to cram in a textbook every 2 weeks while you're in school. So anyways, having said all of that, once I started experimenting and reading some of the literature through this sort of reductive medical model, I became compelled to kind of venture into that space, and then found myself with my wife being pregnant in a position where she felt called to use psilocybin mushrooms. And we went to Red River Gorge, got a tree house, and at around 6-7 months, we did a relatively small dose. It's not a tiny dose, but it was enough that we went on quite a journey. And as I sort of suspected, based on my prior experiences with psychedelics, it was pretty profound. I had my hand on her belly, and a figure came to me and was kind of moving. And I was like, oh, is this like, sometimes like a cobra will come to me when I'm on mushrooms, but it wasn't this cobra. It was this other figure. And it sort of in my heart felt, this is maybe my daughter. Maybe this is our kiddo. It's in the uterus. And sure enough, it was. And I was communicating with her, and she was telling me she liked her name, and how's mom doing? How are you doing? Like, I was still kind of in my ego was still kind of in the way. Like, are you okay with this? Like, we took these horrible medicines. Schedule 1 DEA wouldn't like this. None of my colleagues would really like this. And she said, well, Mom, I'm okay, but mom's having a hard time. And I look up, and my wife is it's just waterworks. She's just pouring through. And she was going through a really tough journey. But I got to communicate with my daughter in the uterus, and before she was born. And it was definitely her, because even if I go and check on her right now, there's the same sort of essence, the soul that I met in the uterus. And so that to me was like, there's something here. There's something important here. I don't know how to put words to it, because a lot of these experiences are so ineffable. You really can't describe them with words. Yeah. But this figure vanished, and then another song, it was like East Forest. It's so cliche, but another song came on. By the way, if anybody out there wants a nice album to do a journey with, his Spores album is quite incredible. Spores, very appropriate. Another song came on later, though, like maybe, I don't know, who knows how much time passed. And I saw this figure emerge again, and there were these 3 figures over top of her, kind of like she was in like an arena, and they were like kind of doing this kind of stuff. And she was being animated, and she was dancing and whirling, and there was all this light, and she was, this beautiful little etheric creature just dancing and swirling. And that was the same little girl that I get to take care of every day today. So what can we take from this? I don't know. I don't know what we can take from this, but it certainly helped me appreciate that there is something precious about gestating a baby, growing a baby, and the opportunities that some of these medicines might provide us in healing trauma, in connecting to something that is otherwise beyond our sort of 5 senses. And when people hear that story, they just have to kind of believe it. And they're like, well, how do you know? And I'm like, because I was there. Like, I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah.
So we'll start there. And I can share quite a bit more about what our anthropologic research and whatnot shows, but I'm kind of curious, what are your reflections when you hear that type of story?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say there's a reason you guys started off that way, right? I wanted to shake you guys because we tend to get put in a box when it comes to giving birth. And so you guys are like, whoa, I wanted to shake you. Cognitive reappraisal. We're shifting the mind already from the beginning of like, whoa, like, we're talking about drugs, like in giving birth. Yeah. Well, most births, you're on drugs. It's just of the Western medicine kind. And so we're going to take a different approach today when we're talking about birth. So buckle in, folks, because we're going to go in a multitude of different ways. There's buckle in. Emily, I want to pass it on to you because there's something that you showed me the other day via Instagram of that woman giving birth standing up and just telling everybody else around her, like, y'all can kick rocks. I'm doing it my way. And this woman gave birth standing up and caught her own child with her hand, standing up. And Emily, that was really profound for you. You said you cried multiple times, watched it 6,000 times and cried every time.
I was like, I need to stop watching this.
Why was it so
Yes.
pulling to you, right? We're trying to pull people in and change people's mind. That's why we started off with some psychedelics, right? And we're going to go in multiple different ways. But let's bring the emotion in on this.
Well, she looked like she was in somewhat of a hospital setting, whether it be a birth center or a hospital, I'm unsure. Yet you could see from the short video that all the nurses around her were essentially, like, in my mind, freaking out a little bit that she was standing up. They're like, we need to get you down in the bed. And she was just like smiling and swaying and like, nope, I'm good. That's not happening. And she was just really holding her own space. And that was so inspiring to me because in my first birth, I was like, I don't know what to expect. I've never been here before. To me, it felt a little scary at times. So I was like, okay, I'll do whatever you say. Looking back at it, I'm like, I don't know if that was the right thing for me. And so to me, it was really inspiring to see her just feel her body and be really in touch with that and have the confidence to, like, in my mind, be her own advocate and be like, nope, I'm doing that in my way. And her husband was right there just supporting her and not, making a big scene of it. And it was super beautiful to me. Mm-hmm. So I often think if I were to have another pregnancy and birth, I'm like, man, how would I be more like that? What would help give me the confidence, the know-how with my husband as well? How do we get there and not let Western medicine take over, essentially?
Well, I think if I can chime in, I think the importance of telling stories around birth, Joel, you mentioned this before we started recording, is actually very important, because if we aren't telling our stories to one another, then we have to continue to outsource our power to what we have perversed nowadays, but what previously was sort of the advent of medical research and clinical trials and all of this. If that's all that there is to tell us how to live our lives, then we're fucked. And the part of that is that there's a lot of industry sort of representation in how medical journals, even the biggest medical journals, are being paid for. Medical schools are largely financed by pharmaceutical companies. And really, to put the brakes on even where I'm going with that, is birth a medical procedure needing somebody like me to be there to save the day? The answer most people feel inside is no, it's not a medical procedure. But we have, for 100 years now, outsourced our power to Rockefeller medicine to tell us how we should treat our bodies. And now that Rockefeller medicine, which even in its early advent, I won't get into the story, but effectively it kind of wiped out made it very, very hard to practice a different type of medicine in the United States, whether it's homeopathy, chiropractics, Chinese medicine, whatever. And we've long now, for about 100 years, we've become so invested in this system, which is now fraught with problems for all the reasons I mentioned. And I haven't even scratched the surface there. But really at the heart of the problem with birth is that we see this as an inevitable disaster around the corner. And you wouldn't know otherwise if we weren't sharing stories with one another or sharing these videos on Instagram that make us tear up. I just shared one that was originally posted by my friend and colleague, Marin Green, who's a midwife, very radical midwife here in Kentucky. And she attended a birth. It was Kevin Gates, who's a rapper. He and his wife were having a baby. She was there as the attendant. I believe she was the attendant. And because she generally only posts her own birth stories, for the stories of the clients that she cares for. But regardless, the video was like, it went totally viral. Very, very similar video to the one you described, Emily. And you see a man very, very much sort of representing what the divine masculine can do in this birth process, which is to hold space. We don't know what that word means. It's this buzzword, but he's there. She knows he's there. She feels his presence, and he's doing nothing to direct the feminine, which is the river running through the gorge. The river might erode the sides of the mountain and deposit parts over here, but neither of them is really directing one of the other. They're really kind of there in this divine union. And when I say divine, guys, I'm not a Christian. I'm not like, if you're listening, I'm not talking about like, we're not going to get into a conversation around biblical scripture and whatnot. That's not my jam. I'm talking about the more broad sense that there's something more to this than just a medical procedure with something bad waiting to happen. And when we show up as a mother and a father in this divine union, magical things can happen. And since we talked about psychedelics, I will also say in honor that when a woman goes through birth and her partner, that is a psychedelic experience. It helps you see fully through this veil of sort of the materialistic, reductive way that we show up in modernity, especially in this conventional medical model. So if we can start to tell stories and start to kind of push back a little bit, it doesn't need to be like a fist in the air, we're taking the system down. It just needs to be a remembering of just what this means. If it's not a medical procedure, what is it? It's a sacred unfolding. This is an opportunity for you to step forward into fatherhood, into motherhood, step through the portal and emerge as something that can be stronger, a family unit that is way stronger than if you outsource that power to the medical system and allowed this opportunity to be hijacked by all the pharmaceuticals and the scalpels and the bright lights and the beeping machines and all of that stuff that nobody likes to be in a hospital. I mean, it's just the way it goes, especially in birth. It's really hard to have that type of experience in the hospital.
Man. And I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, I'm not a father. I haven't gone through the birthing experience, right? And so, as a man, what have you seen of soon-to-be fathers that was, as you mentioned, hey, man, this guy really held space. Like, is there a playbook of maybe a couple things for some men out there who may be listening and go, okay, well, then what should I do? Should I tell her to breathe? Should I squeeze her hand? Should I say, hey, everything's okay? Should I go get her a coffee? Should I go get my own self a coffee? Should I give, I've heard so many different stories. Like, what is the playbook here if we got down to the nitty gritty, for at least for men? And Emily, you can touch, on your experience as well. But I'm speaking for myself. I'm going like, man, someday I'm going to be there. Nathan, what am I supposed to do?
Well, first you're going to text me and we're going to have a lot of long, hard conversations. So when I counsel my clients, as you mentioned in the intro, I do still do home births, but I try to encourage people to find a midwife. And if they're absolutely desperate and there's no midwife in the area, my last birth was up in Indiana. They just didn't have a midwife. Like they couldn't find one. It's a state that's not very friendly to midwives, although many states aren't all that friendly to midwives nowadays. And so I went and attended, but throughout their pregnancy, I was counseling him probably even more so than her, because she was like, I got this. I mean, she was a supercharged, very, very much knew herself. And I think that he was really benefited from kind of having another man there to stand shoulder to shoulder and to help guide him. I also wish there was a guidebook out there. There's a lot of like really crappy books that are written that try to help guys through this as like, here's how to change the diapers. Like, that's the easy stuff. That's really, really easy to change a diaper. You don't need to worry about knowing when to put cream on the butt and all that. Like that'll come to you in about 5 seconds. But the guidebook on what a man's role and responsibility in this process, I actually have shifted my language. Like, what is the man's opportunity in this experience? Do men belong? Absolutely. If they want to be there in an intentional way to hold space and stand in masculinity. This is like a masculinity problem. If you're not willing to do that, you're not a man. And I'm not like throwing shade. I'm saying like, this is your opportunity to show me how tough you are. Can you hold space without jumping in to save the day? to solve the problem, to come up with the answers to the questions. Your job, Joel, will be to really, really honor this person that you love, honor their process, and honor this baby coming in. Because there isn't a guidebook, the new course that we just launched, it's called the Born Free Method. There's a whole unit just for dads where I interview we have 7 interviews in there with really, really, really competent, capable men who have been there through this sort of, I'll call it a hellscape. Like, it is really, really hard to stand in the masculine and to do not the things like lifting weights and everything, but actually to just pause and be still. And this act of doing nothing is actually a very active process. Like, it's very, very hard, but that actually is the exercise. Can you let the river run in all of her fury? And when you watch a woman give birth, she'll get down on all fours sometimes, and she'll be looking at the ground, trying to get all of those 5 senses out of the way. She's going inward, and then she starts roaring, and this baby emerges. She feels like she's on the precipice of death, and that's because she is. And so are you. You're looking down over the edge, and then you're jumping. There's a surrendering that happens, and that is very scary. Can you honor her as she's going through that scary thing? Because when I say that death is on the line, I don't mean you're likely to die in childbirth. Fortunately, in the developed world, that's very, very unlikely, as it is with a baby. You know, like, so in other words, mom and baby are likely going to survive this, but your identity is shattered. You completely shatter that old identity, and so you better know what you had, so that you can help to sort of stand on your own 2 feet after the fact. And, just like with psychedelics, any spiritual transformation is not safe at all. Like, it feels like you're going to die. And that old version of you is dead and this new one emerges. That doesn't sound safe at all. But reframing it as not something that you need to be saved from, but you need to be held through. That's really where my work, I think, is most appealing, especially to men. And that's what I try to impress upon people through the course as well.
Wow. Golly. That just melted my mind. The first thing that came to mind for me, Nathan, as you were explaining that for men, is that we can be so tactful, right? Well, how do we get from A to B, right? Okay, there's a baby in you. Yeah. We need to get the baby out. And we can be so tactful and think that, I need, my masculine is helping manually assist through this process. And the word that kept coming up for me is to stand guard. And I talk to men about this, of being able to go, no, it's not your turn to slay her dragon. You're there to be able to stand ground on anything outside of that. She doesn't even know what you're doing, but you're just standing ground, right? Because she's doing what she has come to do. And your job is not to go in and pull out the sword and be the white, shining armor kind of guy, but just to stand outside where she doesn't even know, standing guard, being able to protect and give her space. And that can be really, really challenging for men, because when you're standing guard, you're standing out there by yourself. And a lot of different shadows or imposters might start creeping in. That makes it really scary. And men tend to go, well, if I'm in action, I'm not by myself because I'm actually with action. And so now it's not so scary anymore because I'm fighting. But as soon as I stand still, those scary thoughts start creeping in, and they start getting it's really a place of them feeling unsafe in those times. And I think it's amazing that you work with men, because the stories that I've heard with men, they still are affected by the birth of their child because they felt so unsafe in that space, that now it's this unsafety to give birth again, not this empowered or loving space that they would want to be. It was uncertainty and unsure and scary, and their story is completely different.
Yeah. I'm going to check in with Emily. I'm curious what Emily's thinking throughout this.
Yeah, I absolutely love the idea of them holding space and not trying to fix the thing, right? Yeah, I understand that, especially as a first-time parent going into it. In the hospital setting, it can feel scary, like, oh, should I be advocating for this or that, or should I listen to the doctor or the nurse? Because I'm sure a lot of husbands and fathers think, oh, like my wife's life is at risk, we should do the thing, right? Yet, as you said, letting the mother, giving that space and checking in with her rather than being like, oh, I think you should do this, you know, whatever that may look like, but holding that space. And I think that can be challenging for a lot of guys who are the like, I need to be that fixer, I need to stand up. So to me, I think there's different personalities out there who some females may want that. But for the most part, it's having that conversation beforehand of like, hey, what do you envision going on through the birth? And I'm sure you do a lot of that work with your clients. And so making sure you have that conversation of like, hey, how do you want me to be and assist you in that process is obviously, like, to me, step one.
Yeah.
I
think
love
asking
how you
people
explain that.
how can I be helpful is not something that us men generally are modeled. In this case, that's kind of the starting point is how do you want me to talk to you? How do you want to be treated? There's this great deck of cards. I think I know the company is called the birth deck. And there's a lot of exercises through that deck. And I recommend all my pregnant clients get it because it's like, here's a foot rub thing you can do. And when my wife and I would be going through, we'd draw a bath every night. We'd sit in the bath and talk about what we're dreaming of. And we'd flip through the cards and she's like, I don't really know if I would want to have you do that, and then when the birth comes, maybe she actually does want that, but we've opened up the conversation. And the other thing that I'll really, and I think this kind of gets into what you were talking about, Joel, is that whether it's the birth of your dreams or even maybe a catastrophic outcome, heaven forbid a baby dies, which, by the way, because we're mortal, sometimes that will happen. We can't save everybody through this birth process. And that ruffles a lot of people's feathers. They might say, why didn't you just have it in the hospital? Otherwise this wouldn't have happened. A lot of babies don't do well due to the extreme measures that we take in the hospital. And a lot of women are getting traumatized, even if they have a natural, so to speak, birth in the hospital, because they didn't feel respected in the way they were being touched or they were being spoken to. And so that's a whole separate conversation. But when we prepare for this birth process, the one big piece of advice that I was given by a great midwife named Augustine Colebrook was, Nathan, remember, like, what to do at the birth. It's going to be over like that. And it does. It's over. And now you've got a baby. Now you're parents and you're like flooded with oxytocin. And you're both just so connected and this baby's there and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. Well, a lot of people prepare for that moment, but they forget that there's going to be 18 years to follow. Your relationship is going to be tested. Your identity is certainly tested for the reasons I described. If you're not ready for what it means to be a dad, then you're going to fall flat on your face. Or as a mom, I mean, your relationship could be on the rocks very, very quickly. So preparing for the realities of what this means, it's not bad. Like you're busier. You're not sleeping as much in those first couple months or maybe first 20 years. I don't know. We'll see. I've got 2 little ones and we're sleeping pretty well now, but yeah, there are periods where you're not sleeping well. You might start like kind of bickering a little bit. Preparing for what this means to your relationship is just as important as preparing for that birth process as well. So that's another thing. It's not like there's a guidebook as to how this is going to go for your relationship. If you guys aren't communicating well now, it's going to be really, really hard after there's a baby here. So let's dial in your health. Let's dial in your communication. Let's dial in your identity. How do you identify? And then let's also dial in the toolkit for how you can support one another through this tremendously, dare I say, spiritual experience, which is the birth of your baby.
Yeah. And I remember being so focused on the labor and delivery part, like the whole 9 months. I was like, how can I prepare best to do this naturally and right the way I want to do it? I didn't even think about all of that other stuff right afterwards. I was like, oh no, I had confidence that stuff will come naturally, but I did not think about,
Yeah.
how am I going to structure my day? And how do I communicate that with my husband and all the stuff that you mentioned? And so it makes me chuckle now looking back. I'm like, man, I didn't even think about actually the more of the hard stuff. But you're so right. And so being able to have those conversations beforehand, I really wish I had known about a program like yours to do so before. Big difference.
Well, and Nathan, we talk a lot about in our program, we take the approach that, we say, hey, give them what they want, leave them with what they need. And so our forward facing is nutrition, because there is a lot of misinformation, the same with birth, that is pulling people in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
We'll say that. And when we get them in, we give them the essential stuff that they need to know. And then we start working the stories, because you've said this a couple different times, talking about identity. And we work the identities because we can change your eating habits. But if you still believe that you're the kid that's always going to eat mac and cheese, that's your identity, that you're going to fall off the tracks, then you're going to come back to that every single time. And so before birth, one of the things that I have seen, and I'd be curious on your take because you have so much experience in this, is that if we're not doing some type of inner work before we have a child, then those inner shadows or that identity can actually grow. It can actually get more difficult because we didn't do the work. And now there's another human being that looks like us, acts like us, talks like us. And we're like, oh gosh, did I take care? Am I doing the right thing? Am I giving my kid trauma here and there and so on and so forth? Should people be doing that inner work before their child comes into this world?
Obviously the answer is yes. I think what is that work is going to be a very individual thing. But if we don't do that work, then we end up projecting those things onto our children. And I mean, none of us are perfect. I don't have this all figured out. I don't have like a 10-step guide for working through your shadows. But it's always on my mind. It's this thing that has come up, for years around my own insecurities or around my own, being afraid of not being competent in something or whatever. And if I don't dial it in before I have kids, then when I have kids, it's going to be projected onto them. And so with our two little girls, for the second, by the way, was at home in the bed where she was conceived. And that one I think I'm doing a little better with, but I didn't even really know what fatherhood was supposed to mean until we had our first. And then once we had her, I was like, oh my God, I really wasn't prepared for this. And the feelings of inadequacy as men of the modern day, although I do see things slowly changing. I think there's a lot of men's groups out there that are really great. I think there's a lot that really suck as well. Because there's guys that haven't done the work and now they're training other guys. And it's like, what do you like? Who are you? Yeah. This is like the blind leading the blind. On the other hand, there's a lot of like there's a lot of awareness around this. And one thing that came up for me was that I didn't, just like what we were talking about, I felt like I had it dialed in. We have a baby. This baby's screaming at all times when they're hungry, when they've got a full diaper, when they need to be burped. They might just be screaming. They might just be expressing. And that's the one way that they know how to do it. And Penny was about 6 months old. And I felt like I was distancing myself from her because I didn't feel like I was adequate in caring for her. It wasn't something I was doing consciously, but I felt like I'll just go find some way to be busy so I don't have to be around this screaming kid. And the moral of the story I'm about to tell is that I realized that these little kids sometimes just need to know that mom and dad, especially dad, little girl, masculine father, that he's going to love her through her highs and her lows, her darkest times, that I'm going to be there and just hold her. Because if I don't do that, she's going to know, oh, dad can't handle my dark times, my pain, my fear, my anxieties, my worries. And so I really, my sadness, that's a big one with little kids. They have these complicated emotions. They don't know what to do with sadness. But if I'm going to love her through that, it's okay to be sad. You don't even have to cry. It's just okay to be sad with me. I found that was actually my role, but I had to get there again. Going back to psychedelics, I actually took a very, very large dose. I won't even share because it would shock a lot of people. Took a very large dose and was by myself at home, put on some nice music, and it just kept ramping up. It got to the point where I was completely detached from my physical reality. And my wife and or daughter at the time they were away in Pittsburgh visiting family. And I ended up going to this very strange space and coming down a hallway with everything like the Akashic Records kind of experience, coming to the end of this hallway. And then there was absolute nothingness on the other end. And I was looking down in this vision, this experience, and I got shoved from behind and ended up in this void, kind of like in the Keep Out or Stay Out. What was that movie? It was a Jordan Peele movie where he gets hypnotized and falls into this black space. It kind of felt like that when I look back. And there was a message there for me, which I interpreted as, now you know everything. You've got every skill, every piece of information that could ever be known. And now who are you? And it occurred to me, like, this is not a matter of getting the knowledge or getting reading the right book or whatever. It's about just giving a piece of yourself to this other little person so that they know that you're there with them at all times. And from that experience, I remember I woke up and I saw a bassinet. It was like I opened my eyes and there's a bassinet in front of me, and I just cried in my bed for like 2-3 hours. It was gnarly. And I, from an experience like that, you're sort of like, oh my God, I'm glad I'm safe. Like, you kind of feel like there's a death process unfolding unless you can get yourself back into your body, which is why anybody out there who wants to experiment with these things, you have to have the right mindset and the right intentions and setting when you do it. And I had all of those things. So anyways, it required this very, very high dose of ceremony, of medicine, in order to come to the realization that a piece of my identity needs to actually be given to this little person. And that manifests in the real world as holding her in those ways that I described, and just letting her, just bearing witness to what she's going through, not coming with a solution, not feeling like because I don't have, breasts or milk or mama's scent that I don't have anything to offer. It's really, again, a practice in divine masculinity, which is what I wish a lot of men's groups really were able to dial into. And I don't think you can really feel that, at least in my experience. Maybe the best, I'll reframe that. The best way to be forced into that position is to have a child. And so it's a fast track to, like, are you going to man up or are you going to step down? And I decided to man up. And it was a very, very, very hard process for me.
Well, and it goes back to the same thing with the mother and the birth, exactly, of like being able to not fix the problem when they're crying, right? I even myself, when my little guy was crying, aside from being able to feed him, right, and being the mother, it was still hard for me to be like, wow, what am I doing wrong to like make him be crying like this, right? But I come back to that same idea of like, no, just be here for him, right? If anything, just be here for him, and like you said, hold the space. Same idea.
Which can be really difficult for men, of like holding space. I mean, I've gotten the incredible opportunity to be an uncle to Minnie. And so I've been able to watch fathers, not be the father, but watch fathers in these moments and watch them get really riled up and ramped, watch them walk away or not feel safe. And so they're creating distance, and being able for myself to be able to step in and be able just to be able to go, here's that space. And that is what I have found with children. And I was just visiting some friends, and they had a 2-year-old and they had a 6-month-old. And the 2-year-old took a very much of a liking, little girl. And they're like, man, she doesn't take on to people this quick. And one of the things that I've learned, Nathan, just what you said, is just holding space. Hey, I'm just here. There's no intentions with me. Like, I'm here.
Point.
Oh, you want to play? Cool. Let's go over here. Oh, you want to do this? Okay, cool. Oh, you have this feeling? That's okay. Let's have that feeling together. Let's hold space in this feeling. And that can be really difficult because there's this times for me where I'm like, no, we shouldn't be doing this, or should we do this instead of this? And no, just that. Okay, cool. Let's go over here. Okay, let's go adventure over here. Okay, let's feel here.
Yeah.
That's fine too. And as men of like really structured, that can be really difficult just to go, hey, we're going to flow here.
Yeah.
And we're just going to create space, create safety.
So what you're describing there is not scheduling in time with your kids, which is why so many dads, I think, have failed us in our father's generation. Maybe you did have that day with dad or whatever, but if your dad wasn't present with you, and now in the days of cell phones, it's very, very hard. And I'm just as fallible to this, or guilty of this. If having the time with your kids is different from being present with your kids. And that's actually where that witnessing comes from. You can't really connect with a little kid. They don't even have a frontal cortex. Like, they are little walking, Labradors. Like, they're just out there experiencing, and they want you to experience it with them. So if you can't be present with them, this has been a very hard lesson for me to learn, guys, but, and I'm still working on it. But if I'm not present with them, that's not time with your kids. They see me as not really there. I'm not the anchor point. And for a while, they would go to my mom, to my wife, their mom, for everything. And it's because they don't feel like I'm really witnessing them. Like, why would I go to you about my pain, my sadness? Because you're not really paying attention. And it's okay. We still love you, but I'm going to go to mom because she's like definitely dialed in to like my needs. So that presence is what you provide to your, to your nephews and nieces. That presence is really, really lacking today because of how distracted we all are. But even when we were being raised by our parents, like I didn't really ever feel like my dad was really present with me, and he also wasn't willing to share when he was sad and all of that. So there was that element as well. I just didn't feel like I could be vulnerable with him. But if he had been present, if he had just been there, watching me be the most Nathan I can be, it would have felt a little bit safer. And it didn't really feel like that. So that's another maybe second pointer I can give to people. Presence is your primary currency. Presence is your primary currency, not time.
Yeah.
Yeah. 100%, especially in our culture of having to do right all the time. That's something I think about a lot and talk a lot about with other mothers. It's like, yeah, you could work, 50 hours, but then you may be thinking about all the things you have to do when you even are with your kids. So it's like there's surrendering and sacrifice to the expectedness of our culture of like, what are we supposed to be doing every single minute of the day? And so it's tough. It's tough, especially when we're like, oh, well, the house should be clean. This, I need to be working on that. If your mind's elsewhere, it's just not going to happen. And I've seen it play with myself, with my husband, lots of times. And it comes back to like, nope, put the phone away. The dishes can wait, whatever it may be. Yeah. Like, I'm just going to be here with you.
Yeah.
And then it works.
Yeah. I mean, and then, I kind of feel bad that I used the word Labrador. Like, they're just a Labrador. They're like a Labrador that is developing more cognitive abilities every second that you're with them. So I was just away from them for a week, and my second kiddo, the one that I met in the uterus, her name is Everly, in the womb, I'll say, she is about 18 months, and I was away from her for a week, and she's nearly talking now. So like it's so cliche, like they're sponges or whatever, but it's not even just that they're sponges. They're not just learning the way that we learn. They're actually like, their experiences are becoming so grounded in the experience of being a human. And we are actually there to help facilitate that. And you can't do that if you're not present. They want you to experience life with them. Look at this butterfly. Yeah. Okay. Butterfly. Oh yeah. That's pretty, honey. They want you to like be enamored with the butterfly. Dad, look at this fucking thing. Is flying through the air with these tiny little wings. I can't see a head. I don't know what that thing is. And then they grab it and they rip it apart and they realize, oh my God, what did I do? Like, they want you to be there with them. And that's very, very hard to do in a society, in a culture that incentivizes productivity over presence. So that's like a t-shirt, productivity over presence.
Gosh,
Yeah.
man.
And that goes back to the work you do prior to birth, right? Of like, hey, can you be present with yourself?
Right.
You start
Right.
practicing being more present and sitting there.
I actually think
what I
that's some of the inner work,
That's
Joel.
That's
That's
hard for a lot
actually,
of people.
to answer your question, being the first step out there, like young grasshoppers, is to just be comfortable being still in quiet, in solitude. That is really, really hard for me. Like I've got 7 flaming chainsaws in the air at all times trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. And, to be able to just sit still, and I'm also a student of Rudolf Steiner. I'm studying anthroposophic medicine, and reading his stuff is like, you have to like really, really listen and really study it. So my exercise is every day I'll listen to like a 30-minute lecture and take copious notes, but trying to really understand what this like clairvoyant early 20th century philosopher was talking about. But that exercise alone is like, well, let's check Instagram, let's check whatever, let's check email. Like, no, it's 30 minutes. You're just going to do here, sit here and listen to this almost meditation from this, some people might say a wackadoo from, from the early 1900s. But anyways, yeah, that's a really great exercise. If you can't do that, it's going to be very, very hard for you to support a person in birth. And so that's a great exercise. I might actually start implementing that.
Well, and we talk about, there's some points that you made there of like, if they don't have that prefrontal cortex, they're in the presence.
Yeah.
Like everything is incredible, and we have a developed prefrontal cortex. So we start thinking logically and so on and so forth. And it's actually hard for us to go backwards, particularly if we have no practice with it. When we ask our clients to sit down and eat a meal for 20 minutes with nothing other than their food, people will literally, I'll ask them, how does that make you feel? Anxious, stressed. Before they're even eating, before they're even sitting down to have a meal for 20 minutes, they're getting anxious and stressed because they're so used to being on at all times. Instead of looking down, if you took a moment, you guys, to take a look at a raspberry, a single raspberry, and inspect it like a child would inspect it and pick it apart, right? Don't play with your food, play with your food. Feel your food, see your food, smell your food. Look at it as if it was the last thing you were going to eat. Now you're out of that conscious and you're into the presence of feeling what that looks like. Each color, each groove, the little hairs. You guys ever notice the little hairs on raspberries? You'd be looking at a whole different world. Like, what? This thing has hairs on it.
It's like daddy's shoulders. Oh my God.
Yes.
This, sorry, you probably weren't finished. I think that's really, really insightful though.
Yeah. Well, my point is there's like, each time that I'm with kids, I do everything I can. And this is a practice of myself, taking 45-minute walks, eating my meal slow, sitting and staring at the horizon, working to be able to go, whoa, this is wild. Everything that's around me is such an adventure and so incredible. And we have a tendency as adults of, it's only incredible when I get the raise. It's only incredible when I, finally get 8 flaming chainsaws in the air, right? It's only incredible when it's like, no, there's incredibleness, which I don't think is a word, incredibleness everywhere. And I use the saying each and every day, best day ever. And people are like, oh, you're just a positive this. And I'm like, no, I'm seeking for the best day ever in my language, in my relationships, in the ability that, do you know that 750,000 people on average die every single day? That easily, I talk about this all the time. You have fingernails. Somebody's fingernail might fall off. Now you only have 9 fingernails, right? When we get nitty gritty to be able to go, oh my gosh, Now we can meet a child and go, I know, look at that butterfly. That's insane, isn't it? Like, you see this grass, you see these dandelion? Like, can we blow off each one? No, there's a couple more. Okay, let's get a little more. We can get down into that and go, I don't care about work. I don't care about what time dinner is. I don't care about whether you got enough protein in today or not, or whether you got a big old dump in your diaper. What we're focused on here is this dandelion and how insanely incredible this is when they float off into the space. That's a practice.
Yeah.
Right.
And, you know, before we started recording, we were talking about the conventional medical model and why am I dissing on the medical model and this and that? And it's because we've magnified things to such a degree without actually appreciating that it's a part of this beautiful thing. Like you mentioned, the dandelions. If we understood why this pigment appeared in this part of the dandelion and why this leaf appeared that way and all of that, and you just knew about the dandelion, it wouldn't tell you anything about the essence of the dandelion. It would just tell you, like, taxonomically, here's how we classify it and here's how we use it. And I'm glad you brought the dandelion up, because during a recent week, I actually just yesterday got back from Denver. I was there for a whole week of an immersive anthroposophic medicine training. And every morning, my little group of 5 people, we would go out, and our facilitator, who's like a sort of a longtime anthroposophist, she randomly picked a plant in the beginning of the week, and we were going to study this plant. But when we think of studying a plant, what we think about is, let's figure out what we can do with it. You know, can we use it for medicine or use it for whatever else? And while that's important, what about the gesture? Like, what is the essence of a dandelion? Like, what does a dandelion bring to your lawn? Everybody has dandelions, and there were tons of them out in Colorado. And they've been like a pesky weed our whole lives. So as soon as she picked it, she's like, we're not going to say the name. If you know what this plant is, just ignore it. Let's try to look at this with a child's eyes. And when you start to actually study the leaf structure, they're like kind of arrow pointed. And you start to look at the color of the stem, which has like a purpley, kind of marbled purple and green color. And then you actually look at the expression at the top. It starts as a little ball, and then it explodes with color, a little pom-pom of color. And then after that, it closes up, it contracts, it opens and contracts. And when it reopens after that contraction, suddenly there's no more yellow. It's a bunch of seeds, which we know like as the fairy balls, what you were describing, you blow them out. The point here is to try to conjecture, what does this mean for this plot of grass? Why did the dandelion show up here? What is the dandelion bringing into our experience of this lawn? That's the essence of anthroposophic medicine, which really starts at the question of what is life anyways? Why is that dandelion different from a rock? And when you start to explore that, it sounds so childlike, but actually, when you do that practice, I did it for a whole week. I found myself going on Instagram and being so just like, this is fucking boring. Like, you guys are boring fucking people. Did you see this dandelion? You know, like in my head, I was thinking that, but a child is doing that every day. And that's why they're able to expand their consciousness so rapidly. Not why, that is actually facilitating, let's say, or it's almost like a reward system by virtue of them being in a child's mind. They can develop such a rapidly developed sort of cognitive abilities and this sort of creative process. But then 5 years old, we stick them in a room and we say, no, we need to know just these facts. Stop being thoughtful about the hairs on the raspberry. Just eat it because it has these different vitamins and nutrients. Like, we should just be saying fuck off, and we should be staring at the raspberries and together kind of exploring, what does the dandelion bring to us? What is the essence of the oak tree? What is the essence of this dog versus this dog? The eagle versus the hippopotamus? Like, what are these different archetypes? What does it mean to be an eagle? And why is it so different from a hippo? That's when we actually start to sort of uncover the possibilities of therapeutics, as opposed to this sort of rigmarole of find the diagnosis and find the cure. And by the way, there's going to be a lot of side effects that we're also going to treat when we give you that cure. The anthroposophic remedies are more of an energetic sort of balancing out of where stuff needs to be flowing in the whole organism, considering its whole environment. And that to me is so much more beautiful. So in summary, we do need to, I think we would all really benefit from looking at the dandelion or the raspberry through the child's eyes, because I think it really helps us reconnect and remember just how precious everything is around us. It's not just productivity, above presence.
Mm. And, there's probably some people listening right now. It's like, yeah, that's great.
Who the fuck cares?
Okay.
Mr. Cat Shoes.
Yeah. That's really nice on the raspberry. Yeah, it's really nice about the raspberry, right? And you guys have time to be able to go search in a field for dandelions. But I got this and I got that, and my kids are screaming, and and you guys, this is why, if you've listened to our podcast, at the base of our pyramid, first is language, then structure. Before we're talking about nutrition, before we're talking about movement, it's language. How do I identify with myself? What are the words that I'm telling myself and those around me? And then structure. I could have all the best theories, but if I don't have the time, this is with work, this is with your relationships, this is being able to say no, this is able to hold your space, to be able to set boundaries, so that you do have the space to go, hey, let's go check out that dandelion, huh? Because without space, right, we end up, eat the raspberry. Oh, let's step on the dandelion. We ain't got time for it. Roll right over it. Roll right over it. Emily, I'm curious on this, and I'm going to be curious on what Nathan has to say about it. Pause. I'm not a woman. I don't have a child. What I've heard from you, Emily, before, and some of our clients, is this guilt. The emotion of guilt comes up quite often for mothers. Can you touch on that? And I'd be really interested in what Nathan feels about. Was there guilt in your birthing process? Is there guilt as a mother now? Touch on that, because that's something I know you say often. We've heard it from our clients as well.
Yeah, I tend to be a thinker up in my head a lot. So I tend to think of, I'm like, okay, was this the best option? Am I creating trauma for my child? Right. At any level. And so I make a decision, we go through with it, and then it doesn't turn out perhaps the way I envisioned it, or something happens. I'm like, oh, dang. So I feel mom guilt that I didn't say the right thing, do the right thing, show up the right way, whatever it may be. And so I tend to have that feeling come up a lot. And it's hard to navigate of like, oh, should I have done that? Right. And throughout the entire process, in the birthing process, right, my whole plan was to go unmedicated and natural, and I didn't. It was like 30 hours, and I'm like, I'm exhausted. I don't know what else I can do right now. And so there's a balance between a little bit of guilt and of like, well, that's the best thing I could have done at the time. But I still continue to go back and forth, and it can be tough. And yeah, I hear a lot of it through our clients as well, of like, oh, well, I feel guilty. I wasn't at my other son's game, but my other son was sick and I had to be there. So it just goes on and on. Right. And so, yeah, I mean, throughout any part of that process, is there anything that you've become aware of that helps reduce that or become aware of it?
Well, I can't really speak to the, I'll speak to it around birth, because I feel like that it does come up quite a bit in my practice as well, where people feel bad that they had this happen, or they had a C-section, or they maybe didn't make the right decision. The first and foremost thing, and this is a big part of, even the Born Free method, which is the course. It's called the Born Free method because, like, first and foremost, we're talking about autonomy. We're talking about informed consent. If you have information and support, then you've been well cared for by your birth attendant. If you've been given it, that information, whether it's a midwife at home or a doctor in the hospital, through sort of a coercive kind of biased point of view, then you're maybe going to question the person who attended your birth. So finding that right person, really educating yourself to the amount that you want. My wife didn't want any education, and she had two of the most flawless births that I've ever been to. But that was just her. That was her story. But then the next step, of course, is to remember that even if you're the most prepared person for birth, there is absolutely no way to control every variable. It's like saying, I'm going to ride down a river on a raft, and I know exactly where the boat's going to go at every turn. You could be the best river guide on the Colorado, but there was a lot of rain last night and the river's a little extra ragey today, and the boat ends up flipping around. And to beat yourself up over that as a river guide would be just as silly as beating yourself up over something that happened in your childbirth. I also think that the baby has a lot to say about this. You know, that may sound a little woo-woo, and I'm cool. That's my middle name. But the mother and the baby have this important connection that has yet to be really fully explored in our sort of materialistic medical system, which only cares about those things that are measurable: blood loss, infection. What does the labs show, the imaging show, whatever? That is our sort of new Bible as to how to care for people. But there's a lot of immeasurable parts of this experience that we just simply will never be able to put a machine on to give us the measurement. And that's good. It's actually good because that actually keeps us in the mode of experiencing, the raspberry, the dandelion. One story that comes to mind is a woman came to a friend of mine who has a sort of an energetic healing practice, and she invited me in to be with her client here who had a C-section and felt really, really bad. And, well, let me tell you about a different C-section patient because this one's actually even better. So similar story, person had a C-section, felt really, really bad about it. And she went to see this sort of perinatal mental health specialist, and they did some regressive therapy. And in this session, this woman went back into the womb with her child before he or she was born, and the child indicated down into the pelvis, "I couldn't go down there, Mom." And the mom was like, "What do you mean?" So she's in the womb with her child, is looking down into her own pelvis from inside of her womb, and she sees like what she described as like a dark cellar with like cobwebs and things. That was like what was coming to her. That was the way she described it, this very, very otherwise ineffable experience. And the baby said, "I had to go out the other way because I couldn't go through there. It was too scary." So through this regressive session, what also came up is that this woman, prior to pregnancy and childbirth, had some pretty traumatic things happen to her sexually when she was very, very young, and had repressed those experiences for years. And just now it was coming to light, whether or not that was actually what the baby was thinking, which I don't see how we could say otherwise. That was her experience in communicating with this baby. That baby felt there was something in the pelvis that was not, it was like a dark energy, and the baby was going to come out a different way. And being able to reframe that story, the guilt washed away, everything washed away. And now she was doing work to sort of unlock and maybe close the circle on this past stress that wasn't integrated and now is being experienced and expressed as trauma. So when I tell that story, like, there's no moral of the story for a good medicine story, but that story in and of itself is medicine for a lot of people, as a mere reminder that, number one, there's so many things out of your control. And number two, there's far more to this than a disease process begging for some sort of medical procedure to see it through. That baby decided to come out through the abdomen. Thank God it did. Because what if the baby had struggled to go through your pelvis, this dark energy? I don't have any idea what that means. But for her, it was very, very real. And it was such a reassurance to her that actually it was good. The baby needed to come out. And it allowed her to take the burden off of her shoulders that she did something wrong, or she didn't fight hard enough for her right to have a vaginal birth or whatever. And everybody's going to be a little bit different, but if it's merely a medical procedure, why don't we just do C-sections on everybody? That sounds pretty dystopic. I don't want to do that to people. I think that there's actually a really good reason for us to try to have vaginal births, but sometimes it doesn't work out that way. And that wasn't your fault. It just isn't your fault. When something bad happens in pregnancy, it's almost never anybody's fault. But we in our society love to point the finger. That guy wasn't well enough trained, or that medical system, down with the system, or that midwife is a dumb old, stupid person, like whatever. People just want to blame somebody. Like, just let it go. Let it go. Like, you have to surrender to the experience. And the more that you fight for that thing that you're desperate to have, the more likely you're going to blame yourself. You're fighting for something that is out of your control. In many cases, I'm not saying we shouldn't be educated, we shouldn't advocate, we shouldn't fix the system, or, whatever. I'm saying sometimes these things happen even for the most prepared.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, that was something that was one of my affirmations during birth, of like, just surrender to whatever may happen. And that did help me a lot. And now thinking about it with all situations after birth, surrender to the moment in general, and what interaction with my kid or whatever it may be. Yeah, it helps to reframe it too, of looking back like, oh,
Yeah.
I feel so guilty about that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's take a moment to look at why. Like, what actually happened? And can we reframe it to be like, well, that was silly, right? Like you said, weight off my shoulders now. And that's a lot of what we do in the program with Joel in terms of the story work, right? So it can work with the small little
Well,
instances
and I'll
too,
add
not
to
just the
that
big traumatic
anybody
things.
out there who's taking care of somebody who
So, that's a
had
great point.
what they may not use the word traumatic, but they may say something didn't feel right about my birth. The best thing you can do is just to say, tell me about your birth, and then sit there and shut the fuck up and just hear the story. Nod along, be present, not just doing the like nodding and things because you want to get through their story, but very, very sit there and bear witness to what they went through. The art of storytelling is crippling our society, or the lack of storytelling, I should say. And if we can bring that back and just be willing to sit there and be present with, it might be an hour, but suck it up, Buttercup. Like, you're there to be a therapist. Be with your person. Whether, I mean, you may not even be their therapist. You might be their partner. You might be their dad. You might be their child. But just sit there and just hear what they went through. That is therapy. That is actually how we eliminate trauma from these otherwise very challenging experiences, is we let people tell their story. And there was a British Medical Journal article that I always cite that looked in primary care practices at how much time were you given to speak in your doctor's office before the doctor jumps in and starts trying to do the doctor thing. And that's not just the doctor's fault. The system is pressing them to see people more quickly, and you've always been incentivized to answer the test faster than everybody else and correctly, better than everybody else. But the study found that on average, you had 22 seconds to speak to the doctor before they started jumping in and doing the thing. 22 seconds is not a very compelling story. That'd be a really, really short poem, like a limerick. We're not here for limericks. We're here for stories. And, back in the days when we had fires and long dinners and didn't have all the distractions, I guess we probably did that better. But I really do appreciate that you guys bring that into your work, because there's so much you can do for a person just by hearing their story. And if you want to actually do any sort of pharmaceuticals or surgery or whatever it is, if you're in the medical field, you better damn well know their story. You better know what their preferences are, who they are, what are their values, what are their beliefs. I also do end of life work. I can't help you die if I don't know what that means to you. I don't know what your beliefs are. What are you afraid of? That's what storytelling will get you.
Gosh. There's so many good things that, just as a bystander listening to both you guys, was so moving for me. One was, we got to remember there's another life here. That's what I thought of, when the baby was like, no, I don't want to go down there. Like, I guess in my mind's eye, I was so like, well, there's the mom and there's the dad, and they're all making the decisions. It's like, wait, there's a third person here. There's the baby who's actually inside, and can we dare say knows best? And being able to trust that child, of being able to go, okay, we come in vaginal. Do you want to come out a different way? Do you want to stay in there a little longer? Right? When I have the feeling, I'm gonna give you a little tactile feedback here. I'm gonna do a little squeeze. Is that no? Not yet. Okay, cool. I trust you. Can we do that? Because I've never thought of it that way. And when you start giving that story of like, the child was like, nah, I didn't want to go down that way. That's a human being that already has some subconscious, conscious feeling, emotion already before it even comes out the womb.
And one thing that's lacking in a lot of practices, which is part of the reason I had to step out of the system, is I could spend more time not only hearing the story, but also helping people with exercises, which we've included in the course and everything, that actually are about ridding yourself of distractions and being in solitude, just like we've talked about, but also connecting to your baby. Like, there's actually quite a bit you can do. And a lot of women intuitively know, I don't want to do this. And it might be some sort of something that's happening in the subconscious or even the unconscious, as you mentioned, in this like dialogue between this pregnant woman and her baby. If something doesn't feel right, that intuition actually is like, there was a paper by an anthropologist. It was titled Intuition as Authoritative Knowledge in Childbirth. And it talks about how midwives use their intuition, but what about the women's intuition? Like your intuition, what you're feeling as a hell yes or a hell no is actually as valuable to me as any of the imaging or the labs or whatever else. Like that stuff is superficial. You're telling me something doesn't feel right. We need to listen. Like, tell me more. What are you feeling would be right? And I mean, we can use this on any level, but especially in childbirth, that intuition is critically important for me. And I don't get to learn about you. You don't develop the trust with me as a physician, as a birth worker, if we have 7 minutes and I'm only giving you 22 seconds to talk. I mean, that's really what an average OB visit looks like. It's very kind of check the boxes, do the thing. Baby sounds good. Pee looks good, whatever. You're off. And then you come back in 4 weeks. I want to develop a relationship with you, and I want to honor your intuition and help you develop that intuition, or not develop it, but help you become, maybe reinforce the value of that intuition and help you just remember, like, if something isn't feeling right, that's what we want to know. It doesn't matter what all this other stuff says. Tell me, like, what are you feeling on a gut level? And in the birth experience, itself, Emily, I'm sure you experienced that. Like, things kind of feel like a yes or a no, but you maybe didn't have any time or really maybe the insight to dial that in necessarily before childbirth, which is why so many women, their second birth, sometimes will say, to hell with the system. They just want to have it at home, because it actually gets all that distraction out of there, and they can actually dial into what their inner voice is telling them.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah, that makes total sense. 100%. Because the first time there's so much information overload, and like, I don't know, you've done this before, like the nurses, the doctors.
And I also realize none of the stuff that I'm saying is like, wow, give him the Nobel Prize. Like, this is basic human stuff. But in a world, especially in medicine, where you're not incentivized ever to really just be a person, like, humanity has been lost. The soul of medicine is long gone, at least as it's practiced in most sort of settings in the conventional model. This is common sense. This is just basic human caring for human stuff, but we've eliminated that in our vernacular as doctors and scientists, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we see it in our program, like how many distractions there are with this diet, or eat this fruit with this honey, and then keto here, and then, load here, and then drop here. And it's like, whoa. Hold on. What about the basics? Let's just talk about water. Let's talk about sleep. Let's talk about the basics here and really touch and tune into it. The more that we can actually push away the distractions, the more that we're actually connected. I tell people this all the time as a rule of thumb in business. Go ahead and take a look at In-N-Out, the burger place, right? If you guys aren't familiar, it's a West Coast, right, burger shop. They have 1, 2, or 3. That's your option.
Unless you know about the secret menu.
Hamburger? Unless you know about super menu, right? Yeah, secret menu, right? Yet what they do is they take away the distractions. Hey, it's 1, 2, or 3. If you know a little more, you can have a little more, but we're not going to put that in front of you to distract you. And there's a line out the door from 11 a.m. when they open to 11 p.m. when they close, consistently, because there's no decision fatigue. When we actually start taking away things and we start tuning in, we start going like, oh, this is the thing that I want, and I'm getting what I want, and now I'm satisfied with what I wanted. And that, as simple as it may seem, I believe can apply to so many different realms, including the birthing process.
I agree.
So I'm interested. You've mentioned this a couple different times, and you've shared this with me, and I think this is so incredible. But I want to hear more about the born free method. Tell us a little bit about this and who it's for and how it can help.
Well, I'm glad you asked. The Born Free Method is a course that's for pregnant couples. It's also, I mean, even preconception. This is really a matter of dialing in everything that you're probably not going to learn from the average midwife, doula, childbirth educator, doctor. I kind of happen to be sort of like a funny composite of all of those things. It's for those individuals who are seeking, adequate information and support, but also for birth workers themselves who want to extend their practice. There is a variety of childbirth education courses out there. We don't call our course that because it's so much more comprehensive. It's, in a typical childbirth education course, you're going to learn about coping. You're going to learn about the day of the birth. Like, here's what to do to do the things, and maybe some very basic how to keep a newborn alive kind of information. What was lacking was, what about the dads? What about cannabis use, psychedelic use? So a big question I get. What about all of the lifestyle measures we can do from even before you get pregnant in order to avoid all of those complications, including C-section, including gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, faster postpartum recovery? Like, how can we actually enhance this experience, optimize this experience for you, your partner, your baby? So nobody's talking about lifestyle medicine in pregnancy. Everybody's like, go ask your doctor. And it's like, well, I'm the fucking doctor, and I'm telling you, let's stop doing these things because it's actually killing ourselves. We're killing ourselves in pregnancy. It is a very, very hard process. 9.5 months, growing a baby, having a baby, recovering from having a baby. Let's dial in your health. Let's make sure your adrenals are working well. Let's make sure your gut's working well. Let's get back to eating the very, very basics. Paul Chek is a good friend of mine. The 6 foundational principles that Paul Chek teaches every one of his students is pretty much all you need to know. Applying that, again, you get into decision fatigue. And so we try to distill that down. But then we even get into the risks, benefits, alternatives to literally every intervention under the sun. Vitamin K, vaccines, of course, is huge right now. We get a little into the COVID stuff because people don't seem to want to stop talking about that. ROGAM, GBS. I mean, like, literally every intervention you can possibly imagine. We give people all of the information that they're going to need. We get into informed consent, bioethics. We get into the history of midwifery and obstetrics. How do we get to be here in this system as we see it now, which advertises safety, but really doesn't play out as a very safe place to have a baby for many people. That's not to say, guys, that you shouldn't have your baby in the hospital. It's just like the experience is very, very different. So we included a bunch of exercises, checklists. There's a whole vault of additional resources. There's over 250 citations. This is the most comprehensive course that anybody will ever need in pregnancy and postpartum. It's also going to be the part of a doula certification program next year, which we're going to be offering to anybody who's interested in learning more about caring for people in childbirth. And that kind of is everybody. Like, anybody out there can be and perhaps should be a doula, because we all have people in our lives who are going through pregnancy. And just asking, what are you going to name the baby? Or when do you do? Like, that type of stuff is like, that's not really all that helpful. How do you support a person postpartum? If it's your sister, your partner, your friend. I mean, there's quite a bit of reason for us to care about birth. If we want to change the world, we have to start with getting birth right. And we're really sucking at it right now in the United States. So, and actually most of the world, this is not a unique problem in the US. So in addition to the course, we also are providing 12 months of weekly calls with me and Sarah Rosser, who's my co-collaborator on this. Co-collaborator sounds redundant. My collaborator on this, she's one of the farm midwives, Ina May's farm down in Tennessee. She's one of the farm midwives, one of my best friends. And we came together and did this together because I think that as much as I uphold the midwifery model, she is a badass midwife, probably the only midwife I would have attend my birth if I was having a baby. Which I don't think is going to happen. I don't think our science is there quite yet. Won't go there. But
yeah, right.
Anyways, the course is for everybody. The course is for everybody, and would love if any of your audience had any questions. You can find it at bornfreemethod.com. The 12 months of weekly calls alone is such an exceptional offering, but we thought it was very, very necessary to do that because it's not just a matter of getting the information. It's about actually having a cohort of people to support you so you can really feel like you can lean into this and be vulnerable and to really kind of ask questions and have your insights shared among the group. So bornfreemethod.com is where people can find that. And I'm happy to answer any questions if people want to reach out personally.
Yeah, you guys check it out. It's an incredible, I mean, even just going to the website, you did such an incredible job of being able to capture the essence of it all. And I mean, it pulls me in. I'm like, yep, definitely
Sign
doing
me up.
that when the time comes. And maybe it's sooner than later, like that. This is an incredible source. You guys, that the people that we bring on to the Proclivity podcast, we truly trust, and they align with what we believe. And so I really encourage you to go to bornfreemethod.com and check it out. Just do yourself a favor, take some time, check it out, and then reach out to Nathan. He's incredibly, I mean, even just the conversations that we have had before this podcast, receptive and quick to get back, a man who cares. You're in good hands here. And to have a program to prepare you for birth, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? This is so vital and so important. If you've been listening to what we were talking about, from birth to being with children, this is what life is about. And I'm just so happy, Nathan, that you are giving people that safe space. Talk about, holding space, that you're doing that for so many men and women. It's a beautiful
Well,
thing.
thank you. And it is kind of my magnum opus. This is sort of everything that I've had to reconcile over the years around not just my disillusionment with the medical system, but the opportunities of stepping out of that and attending the home births. I mean, when you go to a home birth, it is magic. Like the whole room feels different, and it's hard to impart that on people through our language, our limited English language. So, throughout the course, what I think is most compelling about pregnancy and childbirth is that it doesn't have to just be, let's, turn the dials. You're not a car. You're not an automobile. You're a person. You're about to go through this very human experience. So considering not just the sort of physical interventive risks benefits, let's not reduce it to that. Let's actually open up the box of possibilities. What could this mean to you? That is really where I think we've done a really good job with the course, is to help people remember this is not a disease process. This is a sign of the most vital person you've ever been. You're about to grow a human. So let's honor that with not only the right foods and the right, water, but the mindset, the connection, intimacy. What does this mean to your relationship? All the things we've talked about. That's really what this is about. And as we update the course, because information is becoming more and more available, we're going to be updating it regularly. Once a person buys into the Born Free family, they're going to be getting all of those updates, lifetime access. This is not like you have 8 weeks to complete the course. You take the course at your own pace. You can take it over and over and over again for 10 pregnancies for all we care. We just want everybody to be able to get in and to have a piece of this delicious Born Free pie.
And we get a lot of clients who are struggling with infertility.
Well, I have a separate program for fertility. So the catch is, though, that all of the same stuff around pregnancy and childbirth are the same things that help you get pregnant. It's the right foods, the water, the intimacy, the mindset, the connection, archetypal exercises, being able to slow down, get your adrenals back in order, sleeping. I mean, like, all of that stuff is the same. I do have a separate fertility program. In fact, I also have a natural fertility course that lives at the Czech Institute, where it comes with a 150-page manual on everything that you could need for male and female fertility challenges. Wow. Although I'm also updating that. Plastics has become a really, really big part of my focus. And with all the men who are coming to me who are on TRT, testosterone replacement, I'm kind of working through that as well. They want to be able to go hard in the jiu-jitsu gym, and they simultaneously don't have any sperm. So, there's plenty more there to explore, but that fertility course at the Czech Institute and my program it includes that course, but it also has 7 other practitioners that people meet with in order to dial in everything on the physical, emotional, the mental, emotional, and spiritual levels in order to optimize your chances of getting pregnant naturally. Or, if you invest in IVF, that's 12 to 15K on average. Let's make sure that it works, so that's also available it's at a separate website though, belovedholistics.com.
Thank you.
This was a lot of fun, guys.
I love this. I love this. I love this. Uh, this touches on so many different levels of what we do, and we're so glad that you're, doing it in the birth space. And I now see the different flaming chainsaws that you're throwing up in the
been,
air,
been a
all
busy
the
boy.
different things. Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. Emily, anything else from Nathan before we close this off?
No, you gave us so much great information. I'm super excited to dive into your program at some point because, like I said, I wish I could tell Emily 3 years ago to have wish I would have known you and found you, right? But to do something to give myself more support and confidence going into the birthing process and becoming a parent in general. So
When you
really
guys are
happy to
ready
see that this is a resource for people.
in your
So
own
thank you.
worlds, whenever those times come, you can reach out. I'm here for you.
Oh, you best believe it. I'm all in.
Appreciate
And
that.
with the Born Free method, is it husband and wife that can go through
Yeah.
the same?
Yeah, it's just, that email address has access for lifetime, but then also you get the 12 months of weekly calls. You guys can join together, you can join separately. You can go through the course separately.
Cool.
It's really, we set it up so that it should be, you should be able to complete it in 8 weeks. It's a lot of work. It's over 90 modules, all videos, 8 to 15 minutes in length. And so you can just chip away at it as you wish, either together or separately. I would love to think that everybody's doing it together, because I actually think that's an important part of the process. But you don't know what you don't know.
Agreed.
And it might be at some point you realize, hey, we should be doing this together, and that's okay too. But in those weekly calls, we're going to be encouraging people. Might be a good idea if you went through this together and then maybe did the exercise together and then maybe talked about this a little bit. But, a lot of us are not good at communicating, especially us men and women too. I mean, communication is something that we use the word, but I don't think people oftentimes really communicate all that well. So this is an opportunity to really communicate about your values and your beliefs, and really to explore that through the 8-week course. But like I said, if you could spend 7 years reading every single one of the references and books and articles and all of that. So yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, how do people reach you? We know that they got that bornfreemethod.com. How is there any other way that people can reach out if they have additional questions?
My personal website is belovedholistics.com. That is where people can find me for my personal practice. Born Free Method, you mentioned.com. And then Nathan Riley OB-GYN is my handle on Instagram. That's probably where I'm most active. I have a Twitter account, but I think I have like 3 followers. I haven't really put any time into that. I just don't have enough time in a day. And also I don't really care, but people tell me I'm supposed to care, and I can't convince myself.
You know what? You don't need another flaming chainsaw in there.
Building my
right
following
now.
or whatever. Like, don't follow me. I'll stand shoulder to shoulder with you. Don't follow me. We'll go together.
There it is. There it is. Well, once again, thank you so much for coming on to the Proclivity podcast. You guys, please, please, please check it out. If this has been of value for you, continue to dive into it. Continue to take a look into yourself and what you truly want. You deserve it. You deserve it. Nathan, we really appreciate you coming on. Anything else for the audience?
No, I really feel very honored anytime somebody brings me on their own platform, because I have my own podcast, which is called the Holistic OB-GYN. And it takes a lot of time. It's a lot of effort. There's a lot of vulnerability in putting yourself out there. So I just appreciate you having me on the show. And I do want to give a shout out to anybody who's listening. If you only have so much time during the week, during the day, if you've listened through this interview, and if you have, that alone is just, I feel so grateful for them tuning in, for you guys tuning in, and maybe applying some of the stuff that we've learned today, that you've learned that through this conversation, applying it in your life. I mean, that's really how we change the world. It really is just baby steps. So thanks again, guys, for having me. It's a real honor.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, you guys. That's it. We appreciate you coming in. Episode 111 with Dr. Riley. If you've enjoyed this show, please like, share, send it out to all your friends and family. That's how we get this incredible information out. We appreciate you coming on to the show. We look forward to having you next week. And Emily, as always,
Best day.
Best day ever.